So I don't usually talk about costs in my videos because I build a PC, advertise it for what I paid plus my costs such as fuel, tolls, consumables, etc. And that's that. But this time it happened so that it went a bit backwards. Also, as a rule, I don't build computers to order because that sounds awfully like a business and I have zero interest in doing that. I will feel obligated to provide a warranty, after service and all of that. Don't get me wrong, I usually do it, but I do it because I want to, not because I have to. So when someone contacted me with a few questions, and I'm always eager to talk tech, I did oblige and he asked if I could build him something a bit higher end. Thankfully, I had most of the control over the build, so I never felt like I'm being pressured to go in a specific direction, but it definitely was a collaborative task, which isn't what I usually do. Long story short, the brief was water-cooled high-end PC in an O11 dynamic mini case with RGB at sub £900. And the bit that almost scuppered the whole thing was the PSU, as this case only takes SFX and the GPU is really power hungry, so the lowest SFX I could go for was 750 watts, which is neither low-end nor cheap. I will talk about the parts more as we go along, but for today I will need to swap things around a bit because first, before we go any further, I need to talk about the GPU. This 3080 reference card from Inno3D brought it all together because I found it for an excellent price, without a shroud and with a really bad hotspot temperature. The previous owner did do the right thing and tried his best to bring it down as much as possible by deshrouding and replacing the fans with new thermal paste and pads, but the cold plate was so out of tolerance it would have made no difference unless you remachined it, which is not something easily doable. So to that end, we start by taking this card completely apart, and I mean everything needs to come off the PCB. I have already consulted the manual for this particular water block and determined that I will need 1mm, 2mm and 3mm pads. But thankfully for the front PCB all I need are 1mm pads, so I ordered some RTTP3. Normally for this card I would go for a bit more high-end pads, say Gelids Extreme, but because this is water cooled, decent pads will be more than enough, and then some. On air cooling the difference would be about 3 to 4 Celsius between the pads, but here I doubt that we will see much of a difference at all considering how cool this would run when I'm done. I only filmed the installation of the pads on the front side of the PCB. The backplate pads, well, let's just say those won't do much in this case. Of course, if it has something like a 3090 with memory on the back, it's a very different discussion, but for here, the truly important pads are the ones contacting the water block. Thankfully, the whole process was very quick and easy, and this alpha-cool water block is very user-friendly. So with the GPU sorted, it's time to turn our attention back to the build. I will need to point out that I did test every component of the loop separately before it all came together to make sure it's all good. Well, almost all. I forgot the GPU block, but I did do a quick pressure test on it and it was absolutely fine. This also seems like a good spot to give a quick rundown of the other components. The RAM is a 32GB kit of 3200 Mbps that I got off AliExpress. What can I say, the latency is a bit high, but at 1.2 volts you have massive headroom to overclock, and it's much cheaper than the RAM roulette at CX, plus it comes to your door. The SSD is a brand new 1TB drive, and there is no backup drive this time because I chose to remove the bay in order to do a better job at cable management and the whole thing. Originally I wanted to use a single radiator, but after a couple of days of testing it became clear that the 3080 on its own was at times close to saturating that double radiator, so I decided to play it safe and install a second 120mm rad. It took me ages to decide on the radiator thickness, but after a bit of back of the napkin math and an online calculator to verify, I settled on a 120mm single radiator that I put in the loop between the GPU and the CPU for a bit of extra cooling before it hits the CPU. Unfortunately, I lost the footage after I started to install the tubes, but fear not, I've got some good pictures to show you. But before I get there, I just need to mention that the pump reservoir combo is a Fantex D240 with a DDC pump that looks absolutely fabulous, and it is very quiet. Initially, I was going to install a D5 as I have many more of those and only the one DDC, but I just liked the look of that reservoir too much to pass on it. And here are the promised pictures. Of course, it's RGB, and of course, the only appropriate color for it is white. Sitting in a cafe while writing this portion of the script, I am still shocked on how well this GPU is performing at stock. I just want to turn around and show people the numbers and go, look, it's so good! Anyway, fanboyism over water cooling over, Heaven delivered no real surprises here, giving us 227 FPS at 1440p. Oh, and by the way, all the captures are done via Shadowplay because my capture card didn't like 1440p that day. I really need to upgrade the thing at some point. I kinda regret having to rush this build a bit because I would have loved to play around a bit more with 3D Mark. I think I would have overclocked this card quite a bit, but never got the chance. Getting towards like the 10th run in the Speedway stress test, it was still under 55C on the core, so there was plenty of room. Oh, and the hotspot, which was so troublesome before, 6C over. Yep, a low single digit delta. Rocket League is of course into silly territory, but with a slight CPU bottleneck. I strongly suspect that the CPU itself might not really be entirely to blame here, it might be the RAM I chose. The upside of using less XMP RAM that runs natively at 3200 Mbps is that it's broadly compatible with, well, everything, and it's rock solid. The downside is that in specific circumstances the latencies and secondary timings, especially on Ryzen systems, might rear their ugly head, and this is one of those times, unfortunately. But the good news is that it just doesn't matter. Fortnite is the outlier today, and I really don't have any idea why. The result isn't bad per se, 80 FPS on average isn't bad, but it's not excellent either at 4040p max settings. Again, the GPU is being held back, but unlike Rocket League, it doesn't seem to be a hardware bottleneck, it looks more like something to do with the latest drivers. The reason I say that is because I ran this benchmark while stress testing the PC and it performed a lot better on all the drivers, so make of that what you will. If I still had the system, I would probably go back and retest with various driver versions, pre and post super releases, but I don't. Shadow of the Tomb Raider posted 153 FPS on average with everything turned up, and it's just perfect. The GPU was constantly bumping against the power limiter and everything was nicely balanced. This is more or less exactly what you want to see. Horizon Zero Dawn really should be run at 4K or DLSS disabled because the GPU has so much more to give. This should not come as any news for anyone who has played this game, it is very picky on the CPU in this benchmark. In the open world though, expect a lot more FPS and a very smooth experience. Control looked and ran beautifully with 99 FPS on average. Yeah, 99, it annoys me too. This game looks so incredibly good with RTX turned on every single time. Unfortunately, more often than not, it doesn't run that well because of the RTX. I'm convinced here that the RT features are still what is holding everything up, but I don't think I would have it any other way as the frame time graph looks rock steady. Assassin's Creed Valhalla is a slight disappointment at 109 FPS, full resolution scale. This has nothing to do with the hardware, mind you, it's just that the game has gotten some incredibly good performance patches over the years that have collectively really lifted performance on lower end systems, but it seems that the high end hasn't received anywhere near the same amount of care. Shame really, but at the end of the day, someone getting 40 FPS instead of 28 will be a lot happier than someone getting 140 FPS instead of 110, so I guess the logic and the dev resources have been allocated correctly. Far Cry 6 was always going to be a miss, no matter what, unless I swapped that 5700X for an X3D or a 14th gen i9. At 88 FPS, it's very disappointing and another example of low-end optimization bias with the GPU only being used at about 2/3 of its power. Considering that I praise this game every time I build a mid-range system and pan it every time I do a high-end one, I guess that overall it deserves a meh. And finally we are on to Cyberpunk, which predictably was a smash hit at 72 FPS, making full use of all that resources on offer. If you think this is low, well, think again, as it's running with ultra ray tracing and pumping out some spectacular visuals. I had a little drive around Night City and I can say that compared to my old 3080 FE, this is actually a clear improvement coming from virtually no frequency fluctuations due to the thermal load. No, it's not 4090 levels of performance, obviously, but this card with a water block on it is only about a fifth of the cost, so I'll call that amazing. And that's about it for this video. I hope you enjoyed it and see you in the next one.